guys, Marty Schwartz here with Marty Music. Real excited to have my friend and one of my favorite guitar players out there alive today and doing it, Eric Krasno, also known as Kraz. He has a podcast that he started, about a year ago, Eric Krasno Plus One. It's with Osiris Media. He's interviewed some of my favorite guitar players like John Mayer, Derek Trucks, Marcus King, John Schofield. The list goes on and on. So you got to check out that podcast, you guys. I'm going to leave a link below for you to see that. You know, Eric Krasno and I, we go way back. You know, we talked for over an hour, so I edited down the video for this YouTube video. But if you're like, a diehard fan, you want to see, the whole thing unedited, I have that on my Patreon page. So you can also check a link for that below. So if you want to see the, entire thing, go to Patreon. But in the meantime, here is Eric Krasno. Hey, what's up, you guys? Marty Schwartz here with Marty Music, and I'm so excited to have a real special VIP guest. It's Eric Krasno, ladies and gentlemen. What's up, dude?
Thanks for having me, Marty. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, man. Now I just got to say real quick to everyone out there, hopefully you do know Eric Krasno already, but if you don't, you got to see all the different things he's done. He's collaborated with pretty much all of my favorite musicians. And he's also a founder of the band Lettuce, founder of the band Soul Live, played in Tedeschi Trucks Band, Grammy winner, collaborated with, everyone from Marcus King to, hip hop artist, producer, songwriter, probably a good dancer.
It's been a little while since the dancing has been at the forefront, but
okay. If you guys saw any of the clips in that opening of Eric Krasno, also sometimes known as Kraz, stage name.
Yeah.
You guys got to go check him out. And on top of that, I have hopefully we'll be able to get you back on if this goes well and you're willing to come back.
I hope so.
Okay. So, but if you guys haven't checked it out, Eric Krasno here has an amazing podcast that kind of started because of the pandemic, but it's called Eric Krasno Plus One, right?
Yep.
Because you've been working in the music industry for so long, with much success, and it's well-deserved, you've been able to meet and work and collaborate with some of the greatest musicians I think that are out there and that have inspired me. I know have inspired you too.
Absolutely.
But man, tell me about how the podcast came to be, and I want to make sure people know about it and check out the link in the description box below. You guys go listen to the Eric Krasno Plus One podcast. You could start right with the, let's say John Mayer episode, for instance.
Yeah.
Which I really, really dug. I mean, I've been listening to it and learning lots of cool things about the musicians and whatnot, but tell me, how did the podcast come about? I imagine the pandemic probably changed, your working plans, maybe?
Totally. Well, first off, thank you so much, Marty, for having me on the show. Thank you for that incredible introduction. We've been friends for a long time, and I've watched you build your community in such a cool way, and so I respect what you do, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, man, COVID hit, and it kind of just accelerated this idea and made it into something else. I initially always loved the idea of hosting a show where I could talk with musicians and also potentially play live as well was my initial thought.
Right.
Because as you know, some of the greatest things about playing with other musicians, being on the road, being in the studio, is hearing these awesome stories and just hanging, you know what I mean? And I've had so many great experiences at festivals and shows with some of these great musicians, and that's sometimes my favorite part. Of course I love playing music, I love being on stage, and I've always wanted to capture that, you know what I mean? And I've always thought that would be interesting for people that weren't necessarily backstage and weren't on these tours and stuff, because I've taken so many nuggets away from those experiences. So I always wanted to do that. And then I was already talking about doing a podcast. In fact, I'd had a little stint on Sirius XM where I'd hosted a show. I had done a couple episodes through Relics. They were doing Relics Audio Hour, and I came on and hosted a couple times. But I really wanted to do it on my own, essentially, eventually, because, you know, I didn't have to edit it. I didn't have to make it shorter. I didn't have to play more music. And so I got together with the guys from Osiris Media, and they helped me kind of get it out to the world, because I knew how I wanted to create it, but I didn't know how to get it out there, really. So right away, I started calling a lot of my favorite musicians, and because one of the silver linings to the quarantine was that everyone was home. You know what I mean? So
Right.
a lot of guys that I may have had trouble getting in touch with, Dave Matthews, Derek Trucks is always on the road, Marcus King, obviously John Mayer, and some of these other guys, they would have been hard to get a hold of. But in those first few weeks of quarantine, it was like, hey man, you want to talk music and hang? Yes. You know, everyone's sitting at home. Yeah. So everyone's kind of missing the road. Everyone's missing that. So that worked in my favor. And it kind of quickly became something that was maybe a little bit bigger than I expected, or just more meaningful than I expected, because I realized all of a sudden that I was learning so much from these conversations, and then it started getting out there, and people started sending me messages like, oh man, like the Mayer episode where you guys break down the Grateful Dead stuff, and John Scofield talking about Miles Davis, and all these cool things that I get so excited about. I'm realizing, wow, other people dig this too, you know?
Yeah.
So it's been a cool experience, and it's been you know, a labor of love. It's like something that I just would enjoy doing regardless. So the fact that other people are starting to appreciate it is cool.
I've really enjoyed it, man. And knowing you personally is fun. Let's talk about a few of the guests that you've had on, and maybe like just some anecdotes or some takeaways that you got from it. Let's start with the John Mayer one. What's your like relationship with John Mayer, and like how did it come to be? And then when you had him on the podcast, what was there something like a takeaway from it that you hadn't thought about before getting? Because you guys, the other cool thing about it is you guys talk for like an hour.
Right.
You really get to know them.
John and I have known each other a really long time. We don't hang out that often, but when we do, it's like hours, you know what I mean, of like rabbit hole. So we've known each other for a while because we both went to Berkeley around the same time, had mutual friends. And when Soul Live was first starting out, you know, he was a fan of the band, and I ended up going to one of his shows with Rashawn Ross, who was a good friend of his. And then subsequently, he invited us on tour. In 2006, Soul Live opened for him when he put out the record Continuum. Oh, so that's when we really got to know each other, because we were doing, you know, on the road. And when we started nerding out on Stevie Ray and just like gear stuff. And when he joined Dead and Company, I had been playing with Phil Lesh around that time quite a bit. So I went to one of the shows and we started talking, and we were like, okay, we need to continue this conversation at some point. So I think I called him maybe a week later, and we were on the phone for like 3 hours talking about Jerry, because he had just gotten into the Dead maybe a year or two before, and he knew that I had like history listening to that music, but we both kind of were into like a lot of other music, so it was kind of like this full circle thing, because I was into the Dead when I was a kid, like when we met, and then like even before that, and then as I became a musician, I got into a lot of other stuff, but that never left, you know. And then when I came back to learning that music again, it was really powerful for me, because I had a period where I was like a jazz, or not even a jazz, but like a funk snob, you know, jazz.
Jazz hole.
Yeah, exactly.
Jazz hole.
I had elements of jazz hole that I was suffering from, and so, you know, but as I got more into my songwriting side and a lot of different things. As I got older, I appreciated that music even more. And then, of course, that compounded with learning all the songs to play with Phil. I was like, you know, immersed. And so he and I started getting into that and discussing the tones and the different eras. And he ended up sending me the Super Eagle that was built for him for the Dead and Company tour, because he had made two of them, and it's funny because he sent it to me, and I had no idea that this thing was worth who knows how much, and it was the only one. You know, he had one other, but this one was like the next one in the evolution. So I had that on the road with Phil and on my gigs for a while. And then like he called me and he's like, yeah, I'm going to need that back and for the tour, because the tour is in like 3 days. I'm like, oh shit, he's like about to. And then when I saw Dead and Company that, you know, a couple weeks later, it was that guitar. So it was funny because I just realized that I was like, wow, he sent me the only one of that guitar, and I had it on the road. Like, I mean, I was taking good care of it, but it was still kind of like, wow. So he's been very cool about that. And he's really like, you know, he really did his homework for that gig. He told me about, you know, the hours and months he spent learning that music and really trying to give it the right approach. So I respect him a lot for that. I know he took a lot of crap in the beginning.
Yeah. He won a lot of people over.
He did. And that's not an easy thing. And I mean, the Phil shows that I've done, it's not as big as doing like Soldier Field and all that. But I've been in that seat and had to, you know, taking on that music in front of a crowd that's been watching that music and knows that music in their bones, you know. Like Phil would be like, hey, man, you know, we're going to learn, what about 60s? Like he'll send 60 songs to learn in a few days' time, or sometimes the day before for like a 3-4 day run. And he'll tell you that night, hey, man, I want you to sing this one. And I'll be like, I've never sang that before. And I'm singing it to 5,000 people that know every word, you know, every syllable. So it's not an easy role to fill. And I think he did it with like the utmost respect, and he also like added his thing to it. So
right.
I think, and so you'll hear in that interview, there's a lot of talking about Jerry and stuff, but we also just talk about songwriting and playing and, you know, staying relevant in like the current state of the music industry. And it's an interesting talk. But yeah, we just really had fun with it. You know, I kind of wanted to capture the conversation we'd had before, you know what I mean?
Right.
And which is, you know, again, that's like kind of what I want to capture in general with the podcast. And a lot of the guys, you know, Marcus King, I've known since he was maybe 16, and I have produced with him in the studio. He's basically my little brother. You know, we've written tons of music together. And so, you know, I just really want to turn on the mic and talk about, you know, what we would talk about. I mean, the cool thing is, because it's for my podcast, I get to ask questions that might be a little weird if you're just sitting down drinking coffee. Like, so what was the first song you ever learned, and like, why did you know, gravitate towards that? You know, like I get to ask certain questions. Like with Derek Trucks, I've known him more than half my life. You know, my first tour I ever did in like 1999 was Soul Live and Derek Trucks band, and we were always so tight. And there was a lot that I learned from that interview that I never knew, you know, having known him for that long. So I also get to like peel back a couple layers. But I think it helps, like you said, that not only coming from a musician, but also as a friend, you know, in a lot of these situations. And then the other thing to it is like, you know, being an artist myself and having done a lot of interviews and podcasts, knowing what you kind of want people to know, you know what I mean? You want people to know certain things. You want people to be familiar with your take on things a little bit, and kind of like what like you're currently working on. And so like little things like that, I think, make a difference. But it's been really fun, like I said. And it's also just an excuse to like call old friends and talk for an hour and a half.
You guys, Eric here is, you know, you played bass in Tedeschi Trucks for like 6 months or something?
Yeah, about 5-6 months, something like that, yeah.
So I like to think of you, I don't know if I got it in the intro, but it's like you're, you know, producer, songwriter, bass player, multi-instrumentalist, but guitar hero.
That's a lot. I'll take it, but thank you.
So you've had Corey Wong and Theo Katzman on, who are younger than you and I. You and I are roughly the same age. But it was so cool to have those younger guys on and hear how your music inspired what they're doing now. That's got to be a really cool feeling.
It's a trip. It's a trip. I think it was Theo that was like, "Hey, my dad took me to your shows when I was 13." He was like, "I went on Soul Live tour when I was like 16," you know. And I'm like, "Wow." Yeah, because I don't feel that old. You know what I
know.
mean?
I know.
I'm starting to look it, but
Yeah.
it is a cool feeling. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It makes you kind of feel like, oh wow, all those years like on the road, like kind of grinding it out, had some impact on something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And now you've got your own album that you're working on, right?
Yes. So I just am finishing mixing it right now, and I worked with a producer named Otis McDonald, who actually does some really awesome stuff on YouTube. You can see a lot. He does like live production where he does where you can see snippets, but he does like I think it's every week he does a live stream where he puts together tracks, and he's a drummer and a keyboardist and plays bass and sings his butt off. And his
So
solo.
he's helping you with your album?
Yeah, so he's co-producing my album, and we met like during quarantine. He asked me to do this thing for a organization called Song Aid, and he and I did a Bob Dylan tune called "Man and Me," which is actually on my Spotify now. If you want to check it out, it's really cool. We have a video on my YouTube, I think, that of us creating it. You know, because we kind of did that where we did one of those quarantine videos. You know, where we spliced together us playing different instruments. And it went so well that he and I started working through a bunch of tracks, some that I'd already written, and then I just kept writing and sending him. I would send him, via satellite. He has a killer studio in San Francisco, Hyde Street Studios. He has the D room. He took that room over, which is where like American Beauty, The Dead was recorded.
Yeah.
Herbie Hancock, Thrust, and a bunch of stuff in that era. So we just started sending tracks back and forth, and then now we've been using this thing called Pedal, which allows us to do live sessions where I can play in real time with him, and we can mix in real time, and I can see the screen and hear it in high quality. So again, another silver lining to being in quarantine is that he and I have been able to make what I think is my best music.
Nice. When are we going to be able to hear it?
We don't have a release date yet, but I think it's going to be spring time of this year. And then I also released last year a project called Telescope, and that's under the name Kraz, which is I worked with another guy named Jeremy Most, and that one is like a concept album. I have a bunch of videos from that where I did a whole animation series, and it's like a storyline throughout the whole album, and it's a little more like R&B, psychedelic R&B, and then the new record's a little bit more. I mean, it's still soul music, but it's like rock and roll, and there's a lot more like guitar. I got really into like harmonizing my guitar solos on the new record, guitarmonies.
All right. Yes.
Which I've always been into, but finding the right spots to do it and doing it tastefully has been an art form that I've kind of chipped away at. But also having the time, so many records I'd made in the past, it was like, okay, you're in the studio for a few days, let's knock it out. In the past year, I was able to build my own space or kind of convert my own space. And then being able to collaborate with Otis, both he and I were in the studio every day. We're quarantined, and we got to really dig in to this album, and I got to really get into like the details, and also worked on my vocals a lot more, and was able to kind of get that to another level. So it's been a productive time for me.
But dude, it's been so awesome to catch up with you.
Yeah, you too, man.
And I just want to remind people again to check the links below, check out your podcast, but also, I mean, you got to deep dive into Eric Krasno's resume, the music you've made with Soul Live, the people you've produced, all of that. There's so much amazing, especially for guitar players. I mean, you're really a guitarist, I think. So, I just want to make sure my audience goes out there and supports you and checks you out. We'll have all relevant links but the podcast has been so cool.
I
So
appreciate that,
really,
man.
Yeah, man. Really enjoyed listening to it. You have like pretty much all my favorite people on there. John Schofield, we didn't even mention.
Right.
But yeah, just want to thank you again. Remind everyone to check out the links, check out the podcast, listen to your music where good music is served at all the different places. And yeah, man, hopefully we can do more. We talked about kind of or maybe having you on with a guitar. So
Let's do
maybe
it.
We can do that.
I'm
okay,
all
cool.
about it. All about it.
In fact, I want to ask my audience right now whether you are already familiar with Kraz or you're just discovering him now. If you had questions for him as a guitar player, let me know in the comments below, and then we can go through them later, and maybe
Let's do it.
Find some cool topics. I know you do so much more than like funk stuff, but I mean you just got that funk thing down. Like you've been doing that for so long.
I love talking about guitar, man. So don't get me
Cool,
started.
All right, cool. All right, well, let's just say carry on, everyone, and thank you again for watching. Thank you, Eric Krasno, for being on, and I hope to have you back soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, man.
Thanks, bro. Thanks.